The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystalline spires of the Galactic Council's primary station, but Zephyra felt none of its warmth. She huddled in the corner of the adoption center's waiting area, her small frame barely filling the space designed for much larger beings. At only 3 cycles old, she was still considered a hatchling by dragon standards, though her silver-blue scales had already begun to show the distinctive patterns that marked her as a rare stellar dragon. "Next applicant, please step forward," announced the clerk, a tall Altarian with 6 arms and an expression of practiced boredom. The family that had been considering Zephyra for the past hour exchanged glances and shook their heads. "We're looking for something more traditional," the mother said, her crystalline voice tinkling with barely concealed disgust. "Perhaps a nice Terran pet or a Zephyrian companion. This one is just too unpredictable." Zephyra's ears drooped as she watched them leave. That made it 43 rejections this cycle alone. She pulled her wings tighter around herself, trying to make herself as small as possible. The other younglings in the center had all found homes months ago. Even Kor, the aggressive young Vorthan with anger management issues, had been adopted by a military family who appreciated his fighting spirit. But nobody wanted a dragon, especially not one whose kind was known for eventually growing large enough to swallow starships whole and whose breath could melt through battle armor. It didn't matter that Zephyra had never hurt anyone, or that she spent her days reading technical manuals and tinkering with broken electronics. The fear in potential parents' eyes was always the same. "I'm sorry, little one," said caretaker Yith, approaching with his usual gentle manner. The elderly Theshan had been running the center for decades and had seen thousands of younglings find homes. "Perhaps tomorrow will bring better luck." Zephyra nodded without looking up from the quantum mechanics textbook she'd been reading. She'd read it 17 times already, but the complex equations helped distract her from the emptiness in her chest. "They're afraid," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They all smell like fear when they look at me." "Fear is often born of ignorance," Yith said softly, settling beside her with a grace that belied his advanced age. "Your kind has a complicated reputation in the galaxy." That was putting it mildly. The last free dragon had been Corvanis the Destroyer, who had single-handedly decimated 3 star systems before the combined fleets of 7 species finally brought him down. That had been 2 centuries ago, but the memory still burned bright in galactic consciousness. The few remaining dragons were either dead, imprisoned, or like Zephyra, orphaned and alone. The afternoon brought 3 more potential families, each leaving faster than the last. One family fled the moment they saw her small horns. Another asked if she came with a restraining device. The third spent 20 minutes discussing her future threat potential as if she wasn't sitting right there, understanding every word. As evening approached, Zephyra retreated to her small room, a sparse space with a sleeping alcove, a desk cluttered with salvaged electronics, and a small viewport that looked out onto the station's busy docking bays. She watched the ships come and go, each one carrying families that would never include her. She was tinkering with a broken datapad, her small claws precisely adjusting the quantum circuits, when she heard voices in the main hall. New applicants, probably. She tried not to hope anymore, but something always stirred in her chest whenever she heard new footsteps. "I'm looking to adopt," said a voice she'd never heard before. It was warm, slightly gravelly, and spoke with an accent she couldn't quite place. "I was told you had some children here who'd been waiting a while." "Of course, sir," came Yitha's response. "Most of our current residents are quite wonderful. There's young Prex, a delightful Andorian boy with exceptional artistic talents, and Kira, a sweet Deltan girl who loves music, and what about the one nobody wants?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and Zephyra froze, her claws still buried in the datapad circuitry. I'm not sure what you mean," Yith said carefully. "There's always one," the stranger continued. "In every orphanage, every adoption center, across every species I've met. There's always that one kid who's been here the longest, who watches all the others get picked, who's given up hoping. I want to meet that one." Zephyra's heart began to pound. Through her door's small window, she could see a figure in the hallway, but couldn't make out details. She held her breath as she heard Yitha's hesitant response. "Well, there is Zephyra, but, sir, I should warn you, no warnings," the stranger interrupted. "Just, where can I meet her?" Moments later, there was a gentle knock on her door. Zephyra quickly shoved the datapad under her sleeping pad and tried to look like she hadn't been eavesdropping. "Come in," she called, her voice cracking slightly. The door slid open, and Zephyra got her first look at the being who'd asked specifically for the unwanted child. He was human, she realized with surprise. Humans were rare this far from Earth, and she'd only seen them in textbooks. He was tall and lean, with short brown hair graying at the temples and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His clothes were practical, well-worn coveralls with tool marks and the kind of stains that came from honest work. But what struck her most was that he didn't smell like fear. Instead, there was curiosity, warmth, and something she'd never encountered before when being evaluated by potential adopters: genuine interest. "Hello there," he said, settling cross-legged on the floor so they were at eye level. "I'm Marcus Chen. I hear you like fixing things." Zephyra blinked in surprise. Of all the opening lines she'd heard from potential parents, no one had ever mentioned her hobby. "How did you?" Marcus smiled and gestured to her desk, where various electronic components were scattered about. "Engineer's eye. I recognize quality work when I see it. That quantum stabilizer array you've got there, that's graduate-level stuff. Did you build that yourself?" Yes," Zephyra stammered, and used to praise for her technical skills. "I found the broken pieces in the recycling center and thought I could fix them. Mind if I take a look?" For the next hour, Marcus examined her work with the eye of a professional, asking technical questions that no one had ever asked her before. He understood her explanations about quantum flux variations and resonance frequency optimization. When she showed him how she'd managed to increase the array's efficiency by 15% using improvised components, his face lit up with genuine admiration. "This is incredible work," he said. "I've been an engineer for 30 years, and I've seen academy graduates who couldn't pull off modifications like this. Where did you learn quantum theory?" "Books, mostly," Zephyra said, finding herself relaxing for the first time in months. "And some of the data cores that get thrown away here have educational modules still intact." "Self-taught quantum engineering at 3 cycles old," Marcus murmured, shaking his head in amazement. "Do you know how rare that is? In any species?" Zephyra looked down at her claws. "It doesn't matter. I'm still a dragon. I'll still grow up to be dangerous." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and, when Zephyra looked up, she found him studying her with those kind, thoughtful eyes. "Can I tell you something about humans, Zephyra? We're probably the most dangerous species in the galaxy. We're aggressive, territorial, and we have a talent for turning anything into a weapon. But we're also capable of incredible kindness, creativity, and love. Being potentially dangerous doesn't make you evil. It just means you have to choose what to do with that potential." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, placing it on the floor between them. It was a holographic projector, and, when he activated it, the room filled with images of a space station unlike anything Zephyra had ever seen. "This is Harmony Station," Marcus explained. "It's my home and my life's work. I built it as a haven for refugees, outcasts, and anyone who needed a fresh start. We've got Kethari scientists who were exiled for their research, Vorthan artists who paint with controlled explosions, and a Theshan engineer who can modify gravity fields with her mind. What we don't have is someone who understands quantum mechanics well enough to help me upgrade our power systems." Zephyra stared at the hologram, her mind racing. The station's design was elegant and functional, clearly built by someone who understood both engineering principles and the needs of diverse life forms. "You want me to work on your power systems?" "I want you to have a home where your talents are appreciated instead of feared," Marcus said simply. "A place where you can grow up to be whoever you choose to be, dangerous or not." "But I'm a dragon," Zephyra whispered. "What if I hurt someone? What if I become like Corvanis?" Marcus's expression grew serious, but not fearful. "Then, I'll help you make sure that doesn't happen. But, Zephyra, I've spent the last hour with you, and do you know what I see? I see a brilliant, kind, curious young person who's been told her whole life that she's a monster. The only monster I see here is the fear that's kept you locked away from the world." He stood and extended his hand to her. "I can't promise it will be easy. We'll have challenges, and people will judge us. But, if you're willing to take a chance on an old human engineer, I'd be honored to be your father." Zephyra stared at his outstretched hand, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. After 3 cycles of rejection, of being told she was too dangerous, too unpredictable, too much of a risk, someone wanted her not despite what she was, but because of it. She reached out with one small, clawed hand and took his larger, calloused one. His skin was warm, and his grip was firm but gentle. For the first time since she could remember, she felt safe. "I'd like that," she whispered, and, for the first time in months, she smiled. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Then, let's go home." As they walked through the adoption center's halls together, Zephyra heard caretaker Yith explaining the legal procedures to Marcus, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about Harmony Station, about the power systems she would help design, about having a place where her love of engineering was seen as a gift rather than a curiosity. But, most of all, she was thinking about the word Marcus had used. Father. She'd never had one of those before. When they reached the main desk, Marcus was signing documentation with practiced efficiency. "The legal adoption process will take a few weeks," Yith explained, "but you're welcome to have visits here during the waiting period." "Actually," Marcus said, looking at Zephyra, "I was hoping she might like to see Harmony Station while we wait. A sort of trial run, if she's interested." Zephyra's scales shimmered with excitement, a dragon trait she usually tried to suppress. But Marcus just smiled at the display. "I take it that's a yes?" 2 hours later, Zephyra found herself aboard Marcus's ship, a modified cargo hauler called the Steady Hand. The cockpit was cramped but functional, with engineering displays that made her eyes light up with curiosity. "Want to help me plot our course?" Marcus asked, settling into the pilot's seat. Zephyra nodded eagerly, her earlier shyness forgotten in the face of new technology to explore. As the ship lifted off from the station's docking bay, she pressed her face to the viewport, watching the stars wheel by. For the first time in her life, she was heading towards something instead of running away from rejection. The feeling was so new she didn't have a word for it. But, as Marcus began explaining the ship's navigation systems, his voice patient and encouraging, she realized what it was. Hope. The journey to Harmony Station would take 2 days, and, as the ship jumped to hyperspace, Zephyra settled back in her seat with a technical manual Marcus had given her about quantum power distribution systems. She had studying to do. After all, she had a new home to help improve. The first thing Zephyra noticed about Harmony Station was that it hummed. Not the harsh, mechanical drone of most space installations, but a deeper, more complex harmony that seemed to resonate through the hull itself. As the Steady Hand approached the docking bay, she pressed her face against the viewport, studying the station's unique architecture. "The humming is intentional," Marcus explained, noticing her fascination. "Each section of the station is tuned to a specific frequency. When they all work together, it creates a harmonic resonance that actually strengthens the structural integrity. Plus, most species find it soothing." "It's beautiful," Zephyra breathed, watching the way the station's curved sections seemed to flow into each other like a piece of living art. "Did you really design all of this yourself?" "The basic structure, yes. But every resident has added their own improvements over the years. That's how Harmony works. Everyone contributes their skills to make it better." As they docked, Zephyra felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. Marcus had been kind and accepting, but what about the others who lived here? Would they see her the same way everyone else did, as a future threat to be feared? The docking bay doors opened with a soft hiss, and Zephyra got her first breath of Harmony Station's air. It was clean and fresh, with hints of growing things and something that reminded her of warm metal and electrical circuits. The bay itself was spacious and well organized, with several other ships of various sizes and designs. "Marcus," called a voice from across the bay. Zephyra looked up to see a figure approaching them, and her eyes widened. The being was clearly Ketheri, tall and willowy with pale blue skin and the distinctive head tendrils that marked their species. But what caught Zephyra's attention was the complex exoskeleton of mechanical augmentations covering the being's arms and part of their torso. "Zephyra, I'd like you to meet Dr. Kess," Marcus said warmly. "She's our chief medical officer and biotechnology specialist. Kess, this is Zephyra." Dr. Kess approached with a graceful stride, her mechanical augmentations moving with fluid precision. "Welcome to Harmony, young one," she said, her voice carrying the melodic tones typical of her species. "Marcus has told us much about you." Zephyra shrank back slightly, expecting the usual fearful reaction, but Dr. Kess simply smiled and extended one of her augmented hands in greeting. "I understand you have an aptitude for engineering?" Yes, ma'am," Zephyra stammered, tentatively taking the offered hand. The mechanical components were warm to the touch, clearly integrated with Kess's biological systems. "Excellent. I've been hoping for someone with quantum mechanics knowledge to help me optimize my biomedical synthesizers." The current efficiency ratings are adequate, but I believe they could be improved. Marcus chuckled at Zephyr's surprised expression. I told you this place was different. As they walked through the station's corridors, Zephyra marveled at the diversity around her. They passed a workshop where a massive Vorthan was carefully welding together what appeared to be a sculpture made of living light. In a hydroponics lab, a group of Deltan children were tending to plants that seemed to glow with their own inner radiance. Through an observation window, she could see someone in an environmental suit working on the station's external hull, their movements too graceful to be fully biological. How many people live here? Zephyra asked, trying to process everything she was seeing. Currently, about 300, Marcus replied. We're set up to handle up to 500 comfortably. The population fluctuates, some people are here temporarily while they get back on their feet, others have made it their permanent home. They stopped at a lift that would take them to the residential levels, and, while they waited, a young human woman approached them. She was probably in her early 20s, with short black hair and grease stains on her coveralls that marked her as someone who worked with machinery. Dad, you're back, she said, giving Marcus a warm hug before turning curious eyes to Zephyra. And, you must be the famous Zephyra I've been hearing about. Famous? Zephyra squeaked. This is my daughter Elena, Marcus explained. She runs our fabrication workshops. Elena knelt down to Zephyra's eye level, and, like her father, she showed no fear or hesitation. Dad says you managed to modify a quantum stabilizer array with salvaged parts. I'd love to see your work sometime, I'm always looking for new techniques. Zephyra blinked in surprise. You'd want to learn from me? Are you kidding? I've been working with this stuff for years, and I still struggle with quantum flux calculations. If you figured out efficiency improvements on your own, you've got to show me how you did it. The lift arrived, and, as they rode up to the residential level, Zephyra felt something she'd never experienced before, the sense that her skills were not just tolerated, but actually wanted. It was both thrilling and terrifying. Marcus's quarters were larger than she'd expected, with a living area that opened onto a small workshop space. The walls were lined with technical manuals and project sketches, while several complex-looking devices sat in various stages of assembly on workbenches. This will be your room, Marcus said, leading her to a space adjacent to his workshop. It was empty except for a bed and a desk, but the walls were equipped with power outlets and data ports clearly intended for technical equipment. I know it's not much yet, but I thought you might want to set it up yourself. Make it your own. Zephyra stepped into the room, running her claws along the smooth walls. Through the room's viewport, she could see the stars and the distant glow of a nebula. It's perfect, she whispered. There's something else I want to show you, Marcus said, leading her back to the workshop area. He activated a wall display that showed detailed schematics of the station's power distribution systems. This is our current setup. It works, but it's not as efficient as it could be. The quantum resonance chambers are outdated, and the power loss through the distribution network is higher than I'd like. Zephyra studied the schematics, her mind automatically analyzing the systems and identifying potential improvements. The resonance chambers are using first-generation quantum containment, she said, tracing pathways with her claw. If you upgraded to third-generation chambers with variable frequency modulation, you could increase efficiency by at least 20%. And, this distribution pathway here, it's creating unnecessary resistance loops. Marcus smiled as he watched her work through the problems. What would you suggest? For the next hour, Zephyra lost herself in the technical challenge, sketching modifications and calculating power flow improvements. Marcus listened intently, asking questions that showed he understood her suggestions and adding his own insights based on practical experience. This is incredible work, he said finally, studying her proposed modifications. Some of these solutions are beyond what I would have thought of. How long would you estimate for implementation? Implementation? Zephyra looked up from her calculations, confused. Well, yes. These are your designs, you should be the one to oversee their installation. But, I'm just a child, Zephyra protested. And, I've never actually worked on systems this large. Marcus set down the tablet and looked at her seriously. Zephyra, age doesn't determine capability. Some of the greatest innovations in galactic history have come from young minds thinking in new ways. And, as for experience, well, that's what I'm here for. I can teach you the practical aspects, but the theoretical brilliance? That's all you. That evening, Marcus took her to the station's main dining hall for dinner. The space was large and communal, with beings from dozens of different species sharing meals and conversation. Zephyra felt overwhelmed by the noise and activity, but Marcus guided her to a quieter table near one of the large viewports. They were joined by Dr. Kess and Elena, along with two other residents Zephyra hadn't met yet. One was an elderly Thesian male with intricate tattoos covering his arms, and the other was a young Andorian whose blue skin seemed to shimmer with contained energy. "Zephyra, meet Jorik," Marcus said, indicating the Thesian. "He's our head of environmental systems. And this is Finn, one of our artists and also our resident expert on energy manipulation." Jorik studied her with wise, ancient eyes. "So you're the young engineer Marcus has been talking about. I understand you've already identified improvements to our power systems?" Zephyra nodded shyly, still not quite believing that adults were taking her work seriously. "Jorik's been saying for months that our environmental controls could use optimization," Elena added. "Maybe you could take a look at those systems too." "I've never worked on life support systems," Zephyra admitted. "Neither had I when I started," Jorik said with a gentle smile. "Learning new applications of familiar principles, that's how we grow." As the conversation continued, Zephyra found herself relaxing despite her nervousness. No one seemed concerned about her species or her potential for danger. Instead, they talked to her about technical challenges, asked for her opinions on engineering problems, and treated her like a valued colleague rather than a curiosity or threat. Finn, the young Andorian, was particularly enthusiastic about the possibilities of combining her quantum mechanics knowledge with his energy manipulation abilities. "The art installations I've been working on require very precise energy control," he explained. "But I've been limited by the stability of the power feeds. If we could create more stable quantum resonance patterns, you could probably achieve much finer control," Zephyra finished, her mind racing with possibilities. "Energy manipulation is really just applied quantum field theory. If we could design custom resonance chambers tuned to your specific abilities." "Exactly." Finn's eyes lit up with excitement. No one else has ever understood that connection. As they walked back to their quarters after dinner, Zephyra found herself chattering excitedly about all the projects she'd heard about that evening. Marcus listened with patient amusement as she outlined potential solutions for everything from Jorik's environmental systems to Dr. Kess's medical synthesizers. "You know," Marcus said as they reached their door, "I haven't seen you this animated since we met. It's good to see you excited about something." Zephyra realized he was right. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For bringing me here. For giving me a chance." "You don't need to thank me," Marcus replied, ruffling the small scales on her head in an affectionate gesture. "You're family now. This is what family does, we help each other grow into who we're meant to be." That night, Zephyra lay in her new bed, staring out at the stars and thinking about the word family. She'd never had one before, had never even really understood what the concept meant. But, as she listened to the gentle humming of the station around her and thought about all the people who had welcomed her without fear or hesitation, she began to understand. Family wasn't just about shared genetics or species. It was about acceptance, support, and the willingness to help each other become better than they were alone. It was about seeing potential instead of just problems, and about choosing to build something beautiful together. As sleep finally claimed her, Zephyra dreamed of quantum resonance chambers and power distribution networks, of energy sculptures and biotechnology systems. But, more than that, she dreamed of herself working alongside the people who had welcomed her, contributing her skills to make their shared home even better. For the first time in her young life, her dreams were filled with hope instead of fear. And, in the gentle humming of Harmony Station, she found the lullaby she'd never known she needed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself. But tonight, surrounded by the warmth of acceptance and the promise of belonging, Zephyra slept peacefully, knowing she was finally home. 3 weeks after arriving at Harmony Station, Zephyra was elbow-deep in the station's primary quantum resonance chamber, her small size allowing her to reach components that would be impossible for larger beings to access. Sweat beaded on her scaled forehead as she carefully aligned the new frequency modulators she designed. "Flux readings are stabilizing," Elena called from the control console. "Whatever you're doing in there, it's working." "Almost finished," Zephyra replied, making one final adjustment to the quantum field harmonics. The improvement would increase power efficiency by 18%, not quite the 20% she'd calculated, but close enough to be considered a remarkable success. As she emerged from the chamber, she found Marcus waiting with a broad smile and Dr. Kess recording readings on her medical scanner. "Outstanding work," the Kethari physician said. "The harmonic resonance is now perfectly attuned to the station's structural frequencies. The improvement in stability alone will prevent stress fractures that could have developed over time. You've just added years to the station's operational lifespan," Marcus added proudly. "Not bad for your first major project." Zephyra ducked her head, still not entirely comfortable with praise, but she couldn't suppress the pleased shimmer that rippled across her scales. Over the past weeks, she'd thrown herself into learning everything she could about the station's systems. Marcus had been a patient teacher, showing her how theoretical knowledge translated into practical applications, while Elena had taught her welding, fabrication techniques, and the art of improvisation when perfect components weren't available. The work was challenging and fulfilling in ways she'd never imagined. Each successful modification reinforced her growing confidence that she could contribute something valuable to their community. She was no longer the unwanted dragon child, she was Zephyra Chen, junior engineer of Harmony Station. "Sir," came a voice from the control room's communication panel. "We have an incoming transmission from the Galactic Commerce Authority. They're requesting permission to dock for a routine inspection." Marcus's expression tightened slightly, and Zephyra noticed Elena and Dr. Kess exchanging concerned glances. "What's wrong?" she asked. "The GCA doesn't usually conduct routine inspections out here," Elena explained. "We're pretty far from the main shipping lanes." "Tell them they're welcome to dock," Marcus said finally. "We have nothing to hide, and refusing would only create more problems." An hour later, Zephyra watched from the workshop viewport as a sleek GCA enforcement vessel docked with the station. The ship was all sharp angles and military efficiency, a stark contrast to the organic curves of Harmony Station. As the inspection team disembarked, she could see they were led by a tall, imposing figure in an immaculate uniform. "Inspector Valdres," Marcus said as he greeted the inspection team in the docking bay. "Welcome to Harmony Station. How can we assist you today?" Inspector Valdres was a Centaurian, his forearms and distinctive ridged skull marking him as a member of one of the galaxy's more militaristic species. His pale gray eyes swept the docking bay with practiced efficiency before settling on Marcus. "We've received reports about this station harboring dangerous individuals. I'm here to verify that all residents are properly documented and pose no threat to galactic security." "Of course," Marcus replied smoothly. "All our residents have proper documentation, and we maintain detailed records of everyone who lives here." As the inspection proceeded, Zephyra tried to focus on her work, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over the station. The inspection team moved through the corridors like predators, their scanners and recording devices cataloging everything they saw. Several times, she heard raised voices as they questioned residents about their backgrounds and reasons for being on the station. When they reached the workshop level, Zephyra was analyzing power flow data from the morning's modifications. She looked up as the inspection team entered, followed by a tense-looking Marcus. "And this is our engineering section," Marcus was saying. "We handle all maintenance and improvements for the station here." Inspector Valdres's eyes immediately fixed on Zephyra, and she saw his entire demeanor shift. His hand moved instinctively toward the weapon at his side. "Is that a dragon?" "This is Zephyra Chen, my daughter and our junior engineer," Marcus said firmly, moving slightly to place himself between Zephyra and the inspector. "Your daughter?" Valdres's voice carried a note of disbelief and disgust. "You've adopted a dragon?" "I've adopted a brilliant young engineer who happens to be a dragon," Marcus corrected, his tone remaining calm but firm. Valdres activated his scanner, pointing it at Zephyra like a weapon. "Stellar dragon, juvenile female, approximately 3.2 cycles old. Do you have any idea how dangerous this creature will become as it matures?" "I know exactly who my daughter is and what she's capable of," Marcus replied. "She's one of the most talented engineers I've ever worked with." "Talented?" Valdres laughed harshly. "In 3 cycles, she'll be large enough to tear this station apart with her bear claws. In 10 cycles, her breath will be hot enough to melt through battle armor. Dragons are weapons of mass destruction, not children to be coddled." Zephyra felt herself shrinking back, the familiar shame and fear washing over her. All the confidence she'd built over the past weeks seemed to crumble under the inspector's horrified gaze. That's enough, Elena said sharply, stepping forward to stand beside her father. Zephyra is a member of this family and this community. She's done nothing but contribute positively since she arrived here. Contribute? Valdris pulled up something on his portable scanner. According to our records, the last free dragon, Corvanis, destroyed 3 entire star systems before he was stopped. Billions died. And you people are harboring another one like it's some kind of pet project. Corvanis chose to become a destroyer, Dr. Kess interjected, her mechanical augmentations whirring softly as she moved to join the protective circle forming around Zephyra. Choice defines us all, not our species or our potential for harm. Pretty words, Valdris sneered. But when this thing snaps and starts burning down everything around it, your philosophy won't bring back the dead. Zephyra couldn't take any more. The inspector's words were confirming every fear she'd carried about herself, every doubt about whether she deserved the love and acceptance she'd found here. She bolted from the workshop, ignoring Marcus's calls behind her. She ran through the station's corridors, past startled residents and through common areas where people were going about their daily lives. She needed to get away from the inspector's hateful words, from the reminder of what she really was underneath all the engineering skills and kind treatment. She finally stopped in one of the station's observation lounges, a quiet space with large windows that looked out into the starfield. Sinking into a corner, she pulled her wings around herself and tried to make sense of the tumult of emotions in her chest. "There you are," came a gentle voice. She looked up to see Finn approaching, his blue skin glowing softly with contained energy. The young Andorian settled beside her, careful not to crowd her space. "He's right, isn't he?" Zephyra whispered. "About what I'll become. About the danger I pose." Finn was quiet for a moment, gazing out at the stars. "Do you know why I came to Harmony Station?" he asked finally. Zephyra shook her head. "My energy manipulation abilities manifested when I was very young," Finn explained. "On my homeworld, they considered me too dangerous to remain with my family. Energy manipulators have been known to cause devastating accidents when they lose control. Some have leveled entire cities." "But you've never hurt anyone," Zephyra protested. "Not here, no. But I did hurt people before I learned control. The power surge that convinced my family to send me away destroyed half my school and injured 12 students." Finn's voice was quiet, filled with old pain. "Marcus found me on a detention station where I was waiting to be transferred to a maximum security facility. I was 8 years old." Zephyra stared at him. She'd never imagined that the cheerful, talented artist had such a dark history. "Marcus taught me something important," Finn continued. "He said that having dangerous abilities doesn't make you a dangerous person. It just means you have to work harder to choose who you want to be. Every day, I choose to use my abilities to create beauty instead of destruction. That choice is what defines me, not the potential for harm." "What if I can't make that choice?" Zephyra asked. "What if the inspector is right and I'm just a weapon waiting to go off?" "Then, we'll deal with it," came Marcus's voice from the lounge entrance. Zephyra looked up to see him approaching with Elena, Dr. Kess, and several other station residents. "But I don't believe that will happen. Do you want to know why?" Zephyra nodded, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "Because in 3 weeks, you've had dozens of opportunities to lose control or lash out. When that family at the adoption center called you a monster, when residents here first met you, when Inspector Valdris just spent 10 minutes describing you as a future mass murderer. Any creature driven by destructive instincts would have reacted with violence." Marcus knelt down beside her, his expression gentle but serious. "Instead, you've spent every day working to make this station better. You've helped Jorik optimize the environmental systems, assisted Dr. Kess with her medical equipment, and collaborated with Finn on his art projects. You've shown kindness to everyone you've met and put your considerable abilities toward building and creating, not destroying." "But what if the sun burns out tomorrow?" Elena interrupted. "What if a black hole swallows the galaxy? What if Inspector Valdris decides to arrest us all for harboring refugees? We can't live our lives based on worst-case scenarios." Dr. Kess stepped forward, her augmented hand resting gently on Zephyra's shoulder. "In my medical opinion, you show every sign of a healthy, well-adjusted young individual. Your neural patterns indicate strong empathy responses and excellent impulse control. The fear others project onto you says more about their prejudices than your actual nature. Besides, Jorik added with a sly smile, if you ever did go on a destructive rampage, Finn here could probably stop you. His energy manipulation is quite impressive when he needs to be protective. Finn grinned and created a small light sculpture in his palm, a miniature dragon that danced through the air before settling on Zephra's head like a glowing crown. Though I prefer making pretty things to fighting monsters. Despite everything, Zephra found herself smiling. These people, her family and friends, were willing to stand by her even in the face of official disapproval and potential danger. They believed in her when she had trouble believing in herself. What happened with the inspector, she asked. He completed his inspection and found everything in order, Marcus said. All our documentation is proper, and we're well within our rights to provide sanctuary to anyone who needs it. He wasn't happy about it, but there's nothing he can do legally. Though I suspect we'll be seeing more routine inspections in the future, Elena added grimly. As they walked back toward their quarters, Zephra felt the weight of the inspector's words still pressing on her mind. The fear he'd expressed wasn't unique, it was what most of the galaxy thought about dragons. But, here, surrounded by people who saw her as more than just her species and its dark history, she was beginning to understand that fear didn't have to define her life. That evening, she threw herself back into her work with renewed determination. If the galaxy was going to judge her based on what other dragons had done, she would give them a new example to consider. She would become the kind of dragon the galaxy had never seen before, one who built instead of destroyed, who protected instead of terrorized, who chose love over fear. Working late into the station's night cycle, she began designing modifications that would make Harmony Station even more secure and efficient. If Inspector Valdris and others like him were going to keep watching them, waiting for her to prove their prejudices correct, she would give them something else to observe. She would show them what a dragon could accomplish when raised with love instead of fear, when taught to channel her abilities toward creation instead of destruction. It might take years or even decades to change galactic perception, but she had time and the determination to prove that being dangerous and being evil were not the same thing. As her claws moved across the design tablet, creating blueprints for defensive systems that could protect the station without causing harm to potential attackers, Zephra made a silent promise to herself and to everyone who had believed in her. She would not let fear win. Not the fear others felt toward her, and not the fear she sometimes felt about herself. She was Zephra Chen, and she would write her own story, one that ended with hope instead of tragedy, creation instead of destruction, and love instead of the loneliness that had defined her early life. The stars outside her window seemed to shine a little brighter as she worked, as if the universe itself was approving of her decision to choose light over darkness. The emergency klaxons woke Zephra from a deep sleep, their urgent wailing echoing through the station's corridors like the cry of some massive wounded animal. She bolted upright, her enhanced hearing picking up the subtle vibrations in the station's hull that told her something was seriously wrong. The harmonic resonance she'd grown accustomed to over the past 2 months was off, discordant notes creeping into what should have been a smooth, stable frequency. "Dad," she called, scrambling out of her bed and rushing toward Marcus's quarters. She found him already awake, pulling on his work coveralls with practiced speed. "Emergency in Engineering Section 7, he said grimly, handing her a toolkit without being asked. "Massive system failure in the primary containment grid. Elena's already down there with the emergency response team." They raced through the corridors together, passing other residents who were emerging from their quarters with expressions of concern and confusion. The emergency lighting cast everything in harsh red tones, and Zephra could smell the acrid scent of overheated electronics and something else, ozone, the sharp smell that came with dangerous energy discharges. As they reached Engineering Section 7, Zephra saw the full scope of the crisis. The massive chamber that housed the station's quantum fusion reactors was filled with smoke and the crackling discharge of unstable energy fields. Elena was at the primary control station, her face grim as she worked frantically at the emergency controls. "Status report," Marcus called as he rushed to join her. "Cascade failure in the quantum containment matrix," Elena replied without looking up from her instruments. "Started about 10 minutes ago with a minor fluctuation in Reactor 3, but it's spreading to the other units. We've got maybe 30 minutes before the whole grid goes critical." Dr. Kess arrived with her emergency medical team just as Jorik appeared from the Environmental Systems Monitoring Station, his usually calm demeanor replaced by barely controlled urgency. "If those reactors breach containment," the elderly Theshan reported, "we'll lose not just power, but life support for the entire station. The radiation alone could kill everyone aboard." Zephra stared at the swirling chaos of energy within the reactor chamber, her mind racing as she analyzed the patterns of instability. She'd studied these systems extensively over the past weeks, had even suggested several improvements that had been implemented. But she'd never seen anything like this level of systematic failure. What caused it? She asked, moving to the diagnostic station. Unknown, Elena replied tersely. The monitoring systems show everything was normal until the cascade started. It's like something introduced a resonance dissonance that spread through the entire quantum matrix. Zephyr's claws flew over the diagnostic controls, calling up data streams from the past several hours. Something nagged at her about the failure pattern. It was too systematic, too perfectly designed to cause maximum damage. This wasn't an accident, she said suddenly. Look at the propagation pattern. The initial failure point was precisely calculated to create a cascade effect through all three reactors. Marcus looked up from his own analysis station. Sabotage? Has to be, Elena confirmed, pulling up the station's security logs. But who would want? As she stopped mid-sentence, her face going pale. The inspection team. They were down here yesterday, scanning everything with their equipment. Inspector Valdres, Marcus said grimly. But why would the GCA want to destroy a civilian station? Maybe they don't want to destroy it, Zephyra said quietly, a horrible understanding dawning on her. Maybe they want to force an evacuation. If the station becomes uninhabitable, everyone would have to relocate. The residents would be scattered, the community broken up. And certain dangerous individuals would be much easier to handle in isolation, Dr. Kess finished, her mechanical augmentations whirring as her emotional state spiked. Another alarm joined the cacophony as Reactor 2's containment field fluctuated dangerously. Elena cursed in 3 different languages as she fought to stabilize the failing systems. Whatever their plan was, we need to focus on stopping this cascade before we all become ionized particles. Options? Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Manual shutdown of all 3 reactors, Elena replied. But the control systems are fried. Someone would have to physically access the quantum cores and shut them down from inside the containment chambers. That's suicide, Jorik protested. The radiation levels in there would kill anyone in minutes, even with full protection suits. Not anyone, Zephyra said quietly. All eyes turned to her, and she saw understanding dawn on several faces. Dragon physiology is naturally resistant to radiation. My scales would provide significant protection, and my cellular structure can handle much higher exposure levels than most species. Absolutely not, Marcus said immediately. You're 12 years old, I'm 3 cycles, which is adolescent for my species, Zephyra interrupted. And I'm the only one here who could survive long enough to complete a manual shutdown. Even if you could survive the radiation, Elena said, the quantum cores require precise calibration. One mistake could make the situation worse. Then, you'll guide me through it, Zephyra replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Remote communication through the containment barriers should still work. You can walk me through each step. Another violent energy discharge rocked the station, and emergency reports began flooding in from other sections. The cascade was accelerating, and they were running out of time. There has to be another way, Marcus said desperately. Some kind of remote solution. Zephyra moved to his side, placing one small clawed hand on his arm. Dad, we both know there isn't. The sabotage was too thorough, too precisely designed to prevent remote repair. They wanted to make sure the only solution would be impossible for anyone but a dragon, he finished quietly. They were counting on the fact that no one would risk sending a child into that chamber. They didn't count on me having a family who taught me I could choose what to do with my abilities, Zephyr said firmly. This is my choice, Dad. Let me save our home. For a moment, Marcus looked every one of his 60 years, the weight of an impossible decision pressing down on him. Then, his shoulders straightened, and Zephyra saw the resolve that had built Harmony Station from nothing. Elena, get her the best radiation suit we have, he ordered. Dr. Kess, monitor her vital signs and be ready to extract her the moment the shutdown is complete. Jorik, I need you coordinating with all station departments. As soon as those reactors are stable, we'll need to implement emergency power distribution from the backup systems. What can I do? Asked Finn, who had arrived with several other residents drawn by the emergency. Keep everyone calm and away from this section, Marcus replied. And if this goes wrong? He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. 20 minutes later, Zephyra stood at the entrance to Reactor Chamber 1, encased in the most advanced radiation suit the station possessed. The suit was far too large for her, but Dr. Kess had modified it with internal restraints and additional shielding. A direct communication link connected her to Elena and Marcus in the control room, and medical sensors monitored her vital signs. Remember, Elena's voice crackled through the calm, the quantum core has 3 primary control nodes. You need to shut them down in sequence: red node first, then blue, then yellow. Each shutdown takes about 30 seconds, and you need to wait for the stabilization lights before moving to the next node. I understand, Zephyra replied, testing her suit's mobility one final time. The containment chamber door cycled open, revealing a hellscape of crackling energy and radiation warnings that would have sent any sensible being running in the opposite direction. She stepped inside. The first thing that struck her was the heat. Even through the suit's insulation, she could feel the intense thermal radiation from the destabilizing reactor core. The air itself seemed to shimmer with dangerous energy, and her suit's radiation detector immediately began a steady clicking that indicated exposure levels well beyond safe limits for most species. But Zephyra's dragon heritage served her well. Her naturally tough scales provided an additional layer of protection beneath the suit, and her enhanced metabolism could process and neutralize radiation at rates impossible for other beings. Still, she could feel the energy pressing against her, a constant reminder that she was swimming in an ocean of forces that could kill her if she made a mistake. Approaching the first control node, she reported, carefully making her way through the chamber's maze of energy conduits and safety barriers. The quantum core itself was a thing of terrible beauty, a sphere of contained stellar fire that pulsed with barely controlled power. Visual contact confirmed, Marcus's voice came through the calm, tight with worry. Remember, 30 seconds on the red node, then wait for stabilization. Zephyra reached the first control panel, her clumsy suit gloves making the precise work difficult. She could see the red node, a crystalline structure that glowed with its own inner light. Taking a deep breath, she began the shutdown sequence, her claws working through the suit's thick material to manipulate the delicate controls. The node's light began to dim as the shutdown proceeded, but the reactor's instability seemed to fight against her efforts. Energy discharges arced around the chamber, some close enough that she could feel their heat even through her protection. Stabilization lights are green, Elena reported. Moving to blue node. The second shutdown went more smoothly, Zephyra's growing confidence helping her work more efficiently. But, as she approached the final control node, the reactor's death throes became more violent. A massive energy discharge struck her suit directly, overloading several systems and causing her radiation readings to spike dangerously. Zephyra! Marcus's voice was sharp with alarm. Your suit integrity is compromised. We need to extract you now. Not yet, she replied, fighting through the disorientation caused by the energy strike. One more node. I can handle it. But, as she reached for the yellow node's controls, another discharge struck the chamber's structural supports. She watched in horror as a massive conduit began to collapse, heading directly for the quantum core itself. If it struck the containment field, the resulting explosion would destroy not just the station, but probably take out several nearby ships as well. Without thinking, Zephyra threw herself forward, catching the falling conduit with her suit's reinforced arms. The weight was enormous, far more than she should have been able to handle, but desperation and something deeper, some reserve of strength she hadn't known she possessed, allowed her to hold it steady. Elena, she gasped into the calm, I can't reach the controls while holding this thing, but if I let it go. Hold position, came Elena's immediate response. I'm coming in. No. Marcus's voice overrode his daughter's. The radiation levels will kill you in seconds without protection. Then, what do we do? Zephyra asked, her arms beginning to shake under the massive weight. She could feel her suit's power systems failing, and the radiation exposure was climbing to dangerous levels even for her enhanced physiology. It was Finn who provided the answer. I'm coming in, his voice crackled through the calm, my energy manipulation abilities should let me stabilize the quantum field long enough for the shutdown. Before anyone could protest, the young Andorian was racing through the containment chamber, his blue skin blazing with contained power. He reached the final control node just as Zephyra's strength began to fail, his energy manipulation creating a protective barrier around both of them. Now, he shouted, his abilities holding the reactor's violent discharges at bay. Zephyra felt the conduit's weight lift as Finn's energy field supported it, freeing her to reach the final controls. Her claws, now working without the impediment of the damaged suit gloves, flew over the shutdown sequence with practiced precision. The yellow node's light dimmed and went out, and, suddenly, the chamber was filled with a blessed silence. The quantum core's violent pulsing slowed and steadied, the cascade failure finally halted by their desperate intervention. All reactors stable, Elena's voice came through the comb, thick with relief. Emergency shutdown successful. You did it. As the containment chamber doors cycled open, Zephyra and Finn staggered out into the arms of the waiting medical team. Dr. Kess immediately began scanning them both, her mechanical augmentations working frantically to assess their condition. Radiation exposure within acceptable limits for both species, she reported after several tense minutes. Exhaustion and minor burns, but nothing life-threatening. They'll both need medical monitoring for the next few days, but they should make full recoveries. Marcus enveloped Zephyra in a fierce hug, his emotional control finally cracking. "Don't ever scare me like that again," he whispered into her scales. "I'm sorry," she replied, leaning into his warmth. "But I couldn't let everyone lose their home." As the immediate crisis passed and the station began the process of restoring normal operations, word of what had happened spread quickly through the community. Zephyra found herself receiving thanks and praise from residents who had previously treated her with polite but distant courtesy. The young dragon who had once been seen as a potential threat was now being hailed as the savior of Harmony Station. But, for Zephyra, the most important recognition came from Marcus himself. As they worked together to assess the damage and plan repairs, she saw something new in his eyes, not just love and pride, but respect. The respect of one engineer for another, one adult for another, one family member who had proven themselves when it mattered most. "You know," he said as they reviewed the preliminary damage reports, "Inspector Valdris was right about one thing. You are dangerous. Dangerous to anyone who threatens the people you care about." Zephyra looked up from her calculations, seeing the small smile on his face. "Is that bad?" "No," Marcus replied, ruffling her scales affectionately. "That's exactly the kind of dangerous the galaxy needs more of." Outside the workshop windows, the stars shone with their usual distant beauty, witness to another chapter in the story of the dragon who chose to protect instead of destroy, who used her strength to save rather than terrorize. The galaxy might not be ready to change its mind about dragons yet, but, on Harmony Station, one small corner of the universe was learning to see past fear to the potential for heroism that lay within even the most unlikely hearts. 6 months after the reactor crisis, Zephyra stood before the massive holographic display in Harmony Station's main conference room, addressing an audience that would have terrified her just a year ago. Representatives from 12 different species filled the chamber, including several officials from the Galactic Council itself. At 8 years old by human standards, though she preferred to think of herself as approaching her first full cycle, she had grown considerably, her scales now showing the deep blue-silver patterns that marked her approaching adolescence. "The quantum resonance amplification system I've developed," she explained, her voice steady and confident, "doesn't just improve power efficiency by 40%. It also creates a harmonic field that can actively repair microfractures in station infrastructure and even assist in biological healing processes." Administrator Korth, an elderly Centaurian whose forearms moved in gestures of obvious interest, leaned forward. "You're claiming this technology could extend the operational lifespan of space installations by centuries?" "Conservative estimates suggest a minimum of 300 years, Zephyra replied, calling up detailed projections on the display. "The harmonic resonance actually strengthens materials at the molecular level while providing power. It's not just maintenance, it's active improvement." She caught Marcus's proud smile from where he sat with the other Harmony Station representatives. In the 6 months since the sabotage incident, everything had changed. The investigation that followed had revealed that Inspector Valdris had indeed planted devices designed to trigger the reactor cascade, part of a faction within the GCA that believed dangerous individuals should be eliminated rather than rehabilitated. The scandal had led to his arrest and the implementation of new oversight protocols. More importantly for Zephyra, the successful resolution of the crisis had brought Harmony Station to the attention of progressive members of the galactic community. Scientists, engineers, and social reformers had begun visiting to study both the station's innovative technology and its unique approach to providing sanctuary for society's outcasts. "The young engineer's work is quite impressive," commented Dr. Vex, a renowned Altarian physicist whose research had helped shape current quantum theory. "Though I must ask, how do we know this technology is safe? Given the creator's heritage, shouldn't we be concerned about potential aggressive applications?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Zephyra felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever someone reduced her to her species' dark history. But, instead of shrinking back as she once would have, she straightened her shoulders and met Dr. Vex's gaze directly. "You're absolutely right to be concerned about aggressive applications," she said calmly. "Any technology can be weaponized if that's the creator's intent. Quantum physics gave us both clean fusion power and antimatter bombs. Gravity manipulation provides both artificial gravity and devastating weapons. The question isn't whether something can be dangerous, it's whether it's designed with constructive or destructive purpose." She gestured to the holographic display, which now showed the internal structure of her resonance system. Every component of this design is optimized for stability, healing, and support. The resonance frequencies are specifically tuned to biological rhythms that promote health and well-being. Could someone modify it into a weapon? Possibly. Could someone modify a medical scanner into a weapon? Definitely. But that doesn't make medical scanners dangerous, it makes the people who would misuse them dangerous. Elena, now serving as the station's chief engineering officer, stood to add her support. In the past 6 months, Zephyr's innovations have prevented 3 potential station failures, improved our power efficiency by 60%, and her harmonic healing systems have accelerated recovery times for injured residents by an average of 40%. Her work has saved lives and improved the quality of life for everyone here. The philosophical question, interjected Dr. Kess, her mechanical augmentations glinting as she moved, is whether we judge individuals by their potential for harm or by their chosen actions. Every species represented in this room has members capable of violence and destruction. What matters is what we choose to do with our capabilities. Finn, who had become something of a celebrity for his role in the reactor incident, created a small light sculpture that danced through the air above the conference table. Some of us are here because we were judged by our potential for harm rather than our actual character. Harmony Station exists because Marcus Chen believes that potential should be nurtured toward positive ends, not feared into isolation. Administrator Korth studied the display for several long moments before speaking. "If we were to approve the implementation of this technology on council stations, what safeguards would you recommend?" "The same safeguards you use for any advanced technology," Zephyr replied without hesitation. "Proper training for operators, regular safety inspections, and, most importantly, oversight by people who understand both the technical and ethical implications of the work." "And you would be willing to provide such training and oversight?" Zephyr glanced at Marcus, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I would be honored to help other communities benefit from these innovations. But, with conditions." Several representatives looked surprised. A child, even one with demonstrated abilities, making demands of galactic officials was almost unheard of. "What conditions?" Dr. Vex asked, his tone now more curious than skeptical. "First, any station or facility that implements this technology must agree to provide sanctuary to at least 10 individuals who have been deemed too dangerous for traditional rehabilitation. Second, they must establish educational programs that teach engineering and science to young people regardless of their species or background. Third, they must maintain open communication with Harmony Station and share their own innovations freely with our community." The room fell silent as the assembled representatives considered her terms. Finally, Administrator Korth's mandibles clicked in. What Zephyr had learned was a sign of amusement among his species. "You're trying to replicate Harmony Station's model across the galaxy," he observed. "I'm trying to create a galaxy where no child has to grow up believing they're a monster," Zephyr replied simply. "Where potential is nurtured instead of feared, and where diversity of thought and ability is seen as a strength rather than a threat." The negotiations continued for several hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The technology Zephyr had developed was too valuable and too beneficial to ignore, and her conditions, while unusual, were not unreasonable. By the end of the day, preliminary agreements had been reached to implement her resonance systems on 15 major council installations, with provisions for expansion if the initial trials proved successful. As the delegates departed, many made specific requests to speak with Zephyr privately. Some wanted to discuss technical details, others were curious about her educational background, and a few, the ones who mattered most to her, wanted to know about opportunities for their own communities to adopt Harmony Station's model. That evening, the station held a celebration in the main commons area. The space was filled with music, laughter, and the kind of warm community atmosphere that Zephyr had come to treasure. She found herself moving through the crowd, accepting congratulations and thanks from friends who had become family. "How does it feel?" asked Jorik, approaching with 2 glasses of the fruit juice blend that had become Zephyr's favorite drink, to know that your work will soon be helping people across the galaxy. Terrifying and wonderful, Zephyra admitted. A year ago, I thought the best I could hope for was that someone might tolerate my existence. Now I'm designing systems that could help millions of people. And establishing the foundation for a new model of galactic society, Dr. Kess added, joining their conversation. The sanctuary requirements you insisted on will force communities to confront their own prejudices about dangerous individuals. Zephyra sipped her juice thoughtfully. Do you think it will actually work? Can we really change how the galaxy thinks about people like us? Change is always slow, Marcus said, appearing beside her with his usual quiet grace. But it is possible. Look at how much has changed just here on Harmony Station in the past year. You arrived as a frightened child who believed she was unwanted and dangerous. Now you're a confident young engineer whose innovations will benefit countless communities. But, more importantly, Elena added, you've proven that being dangerous and being evil are completely different things. Every person who meets you, every community that benefits from your work, will have to re-evaluate their assumptions about dragons. As the celebration continued around them, Zephyra found herself drawn to one of the observation lounges where she could look out at the stars. The same stars that had witnessed her arrival as an unwanted orphan now looked down on a young woman who had found her place in the galaxy. Finn joined her at the viewing window, his energy manipulation creating a subtle light display that reflected off the transparent aluminum. Feeling philosophical, he asked. Just thinking about how much everything has changed, Zephyra replied. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real. That I have a family, friends, a purpose. It's real, Marcus assured her, settling into a nearby chair. And it's just the beginning. You've got decades ahead of you to continue growing, learning, and making a difference. What if I fail? What if I make a mistake that proves all the fearmongers right? Then, you'll learn from the mistake and do better next time, Marcus said simply. That's what growing up means, making mistakes, learning from them, and continuing to choose who you want to be. Dr. Kess approached their group, her medical scanner in hand. Speaking of growing up, your latest physical shows you're entering the accelerated growth phase typical of your species. You'll probably gain another 2 feet in height and considerable mass over the next year. Zephyra looked down at her claws, which had indeed grown noticeably sharper and stronger in recent months. Will I become scary looking? You'll become impressive looking, Elena corrected. There's a difference. Finn is impressive when he creates those massive energy sculptures. Dr. Kess is impressive when her augmentations extend into full medical mode. You'll be impressive when you reach your full size and abilities. And intimidating to people who judge by appearances instead of actions, Jorik added. But that's their limitation, not yours. Over the following months, as construction began on the first council stations to implement Zephyra's technology, she threw herself into the work of training the engineers who would maintain the systems. It was challenging in new ways, not just the technical complexity, but the interpersonal dynamics of working with adults who were still adjusting to taking direction from someone so young. The first few training sessions were awkward, with engineers who were decades older struggling to reconcile their preconceptions with the reality of Zephyra's expertise. But, as they worked together on the installations, competence won out over prejudice. Soon she was receiving requests for training from communities across the galaxy. Each installation brought new challenges and new opportunities to prove that cooperation could triumph over fear. The sanctuary requirements she'd insisted on meant that each station implementing her technology also became a haven for others like herself, individuals whose abilities or backgrounds had made them outcasts from mainstream society. A year after the initial council presentation, Zephyra stood in the main engineering bay of Harmony Station, now significantly larger and more complex than when she'd first arrived. The station had become a hub for refugees, scientists, and innovators from across the galaxy. Her own workshop had expanded to accommodate increasingly sophisticated projects, and she now supervised a team of junior engineers from various species. Zephyra, Marcus called from his office. Could you join me for a moment? She found him reviewing reports from the latest installations, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. The efficiency reports from Station Beta 7 are in. Your resonance system is performing 20% above projected specifications. That's the third installation to exceed expectations, Zephyra noted, settling into the chair across from his desk. I think we're ready to move to the next phase of expansion. Marcus set down his tablet and looked at her with the expression she'd learned meant he had something important to discuss. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something else. The Galactic Council has offered you a position as Senior Technology Advisor. It would mean traveling between systems, overseeing implementations, and having a direct voice in Council technology policy. Zephyra felt her scales ripple with surprise and a touch of fear. Leave Harmony Station? Not permanently, Marcus assured her quickly. This would always be your home base. But it would mean spending months at a time in other systems, working directly with galactic leadership. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. To have her voice heard at the highest levels of galactic government, to influence policy that could affect billions of lives, it was beyond anything she'd ever imagined possible. What do you think I should do? She asked. Marcus smiled. I think you should do whatever feels right to you. You're not the frightened child who arrived here 3 years ago. You're a brilliant young adult who has already changed the galaxy in ways most people never could. Trust yourself to know what's right. That evening, Zephyra found herself back in the observation lounge where she'd spent so many important moments of her life at Harmony Station. But, instead of feeling small and lost as she once had, she felt the weight of possibility stretching out before her like the starfield beyond the window. Elena found her there, as she'd known someone would. Considering the council position? Trying to imagine myself in the council chambers, making decisions that affect entire systems, Zephyra replied. It's hard to believe they want my input. Why? You've proven your abilities repeatedly. Your innovations are improving lives across the galaxy, and your insistence on including outcasts and refugees has forced dozens of communities to reconsider their prejudices. If anything, the council needs more voices like yours. What if I'm not ready? Elena sat beside her, looking out at the stars. 3 years ago, you weren't ready to trust that someone could want you for who you are rather than fear you for what you might become. 2 years ago, you weren't ready to believe your engineering skills could benefit others. Last year, you weren't ready to speak up to galactic officials about your conditions for sharing your technology. But, each time, when the moment came, you were ready. So you think I should accept? I think you should trust the same instincts that have guided you this far, Elena said gently. The ones that told you to save our home when the reactors failed, to insist on sanctuary requirements when sharing your technology, and to believe that being dangerous and being evil aren't the same thing. The next morning, Zephyra stood once again before a galactic communications array, this time to address the council directly with her decision. Representatives from across the known galaxy listened as she accepted the position, but with her own conditions as had become her trademark. I'll serve as Senior Technology Advisor, she said, her voice carrying the confidence she'd built over years of proving herself.